All right, we're back, Chris, for the bully pulpit. And we're kind of leading in. We're chatting a little bit before this. I know there's some interesting races that you were involved in. There's just been a lot of political news lately, a lot of interesting news. I think we're going to have to talk about the catfight at some point. I think some of these things are going to come up, but why don't we start with what's going on your end? What are you seeing? What what have you been? What victories have you had? Tell us about it.
I had a nice win last week, North Carolina 13, and I was working for an independent expenditure called American Foundations, and I've worked with them for about a decade or so. They're a regular client, and basically we were a super PAC supporting a guy named Brad Knott. And American Foundations is a bunch of folks, and they're mostly lawyers and community leaders and Chamber of Commerce Rotary Club types, and they tend to nominate and kind of that kind of Republican. They don't support the Marjorie Taylor Greens of the world or the crazy people. And our candidate was a U.S. attorney who was worked for the Biden Justice Department under the son of the former Democratic governor. He was so it was kind of like not the best candidate for a Republican fucking primary in North Carolina.
Right.
But it was and there was also in the race, there were like 12 candidates. Also in the race was a woman who was just writing checks. I think she wound up spending $4 or $5 million overall. And there was another guy who was the fire-breathing Christian conservative. And we ran a very smart race and essentially went from, we weren't at 0, but we were at 5. And we, despite being outspent by the top 4 candidates, the campaign didn't have an ability because he jumped in late. Our candidate, Brad Knott, jumped in late, and he didn't have the ability to raise money quickly. And so the super PAC did all the work, and it was kind of a fairly clever thing because it was a super PAC that had no resources, and basically our spots were based on one news clip and 3 headlines that didn't have his name in it, and so we didn't have a lot of resources or footage of the candidate, and you can't coordinate. You can't say, hey, put some pictures online or do this or improve your website. You can't coordinate, and so it was kind of this kind of voodoo kind of creative thing. But anyway, long story short, we snuck into the runoff by about 1,200 votes against the woman who had spent all the money. And if you don't hit 30%, it goes to a runoff, and then it was a 1-on-1. And she was, clubbing us like a baby seal for a while. But our research turned up that she had voted for Obama, and had trashed Trump. And so we made sure that the Trump people knew about that, and they turned around and endorsed us. and we were down, and the timing of it was interesting, is that we were down like 11 points, 12 points. And when we took the survey, we were like, we can still win this because it was very soft. And, because we had uncovered the Obama thing. And our target was going to be not her voters. We were going to try to persuade all the people that didn't vote for either of us in the primary. That was the race. And we felt good about that. Even with, being outspent 2 to 3 to 1, we thought we had a superior message. But then Trump endorsed our candidate, and the world shifted overnight. We asked the survey, who is the more Trump-like candidate? Our person who was in the Biden Justice Department, holy shit, And that's what they were hammering us on, that we were the Biden stalking horse candidate, or this woman who's a conservative farmer. And but the whole thing flipped, and anyway, we won going away. What was also interesting is that Trump endorsed us on in a tweet on Truth Social, and so it was this kind of tweet that kind of nobody saw. I had to sign up for Truth Social so I could go and get it and find it. But basically, we made the whole thing. We took that, and it was great. Trump, my complete and utter confidence, and blah blah blah. And it was this all in caps, and it was a typical Trump thing. Basically, we took that and amplified it out in its form. So, like, we didn't change it. We didn't turn it into a really slick spot. It was literally this kind of really easy vanilla thing that we turned into a lot of digital and a lot of display and a bunch of TV. It was so bad. She took 2 surveys and she wound up dropping out of the race and endorsing our candidate. But we still ran scared because of early voting. You don't know how many votes are going to come in. And, basically, if there's no race, you're going to have to turn out of a school board election. And so we just primed. But anyway, it was a nice win. And this guy's going to be a congressman for as long as he wants. But chances are he's going to want to be a governor or a senator. And he certainly is, has the demeanor and background and intellect to actually be a force for good in this country, so it was a nice win. But it was also very instructive that you see how important Trump is in the Republican primary.
Yeah.
But Trump is like a for you surfers out there, like Trump is the big wave at the end. But you have to be on your board paddling like hell and knowing when to engage it. You can't be on the beach and, putting on suntan lotion and saying, "Help me, Trump." It doesn't work. So
to do a little bit of background on this, I'm very curious. So we had, for this district, we had the race Wiley Nickel versus Bo Hines in the 22 midterm contest that we were running on Fantasy Elect.
Mm-hmm.
And Wiley Nickel won that race, right? The Democrat. What happened to Wiley Nickel? Did he resign? Because there's no incumbent running. Your guy's running against Frank Pierce. It looks like. I never heard of.
Yeah, it's a Republican district. It's going to be there's not really going to be.
Did it get?
It was a redistrict thing.
Redistricted? Was there redistricting?
Yeah, part of it was redistricting, and this was kind of the result. There have been a bunch of.
Was this all wrapped up in that lawsuit North Carolina had with their redistricting and everything?
And the governor was going to have a thing, and the legislator had a plan, and the court had a plan. I mean, and this was kind of it's an old district, but it's been rejiggered a bunch of times, and it became available.
So it's not going to be much of a competition against this Frank Pierce, who might be, by the way, the great grandson of Franklin Pierce, for all I know.
Right.
Is this going to be much of a competition for the general?
No, this is the primary. The primary is everything. I mean, I believe it's it looks like it's a Trump plus 15 district, plus 10, plus 12.
Wow. Okay.
So basically,
and for anybody who's listening or watching this later, and if they want to look at Ballotpedia in North Carolina's 13th, your guy Brad, so he had 18%. He was trailing Kelly by about 9%. Yeah. She was the lead going into the runoff. That was in March. That was on Super Tuesday. And then, so she unofficially withdrew, but you guys absolutely fucking crushed her. 91% of the vote about.
Yeah. And it was interesting is that, we ran scared because we were like, oh my God, if we were endorsed by Trump and she drops out, but because of early voting and the the county geography of it. If we lost this, we're going to be the biggest imbeciles in the history of the thing. And so,
Totally.
and to the credit, and by the way, why it's important to have, smart people above you, and the money people at the super PAC, they were like, no, we allocated the money. Let's spend the full program. It wasn't like,
Yeah.
it wasn't like, yeah, we want to take that $200,000 back. It wasn't a lot of money. It was like 150, 200,000. We want to take that money back, and because we can use that for something else maybe in the future. No, it was like, no, this was the plan, and let's execute the plan to the end. And it's,
Totally.
and it's, so it was good. I mean, it was,
This is just like back in the old BCS bowl days in college football. You don't stop scoring points until the game's over because you got to
Right.
worry about the rankings coming out, right? Like,
Yeah.
run up the score.
Yeah, but I think he's going to be. I mean, he's a serious adult. What's really nice about Brad Knott is he's a serious adult. I mean, again, watching from afar, I'm the super PAC, but we did a ton of research on him. He's the kind of guy that you would actually like to represent you. Because he's smart, he's serious, he's diligent. He's not particularly bombastic and crazy. So so it was a nice win. I mean, nice win and a pleasant experience. One of the great things about working in politics at I'll sound like a dick saying it, but working at my level is that you get to work with I've gotten to work with super smart and super funny people. And as I'm kind of in my emeritus years, there's less and less of that. And it's part of it's because of the largeness. It's become, it used to be essentially the business was entrepreneurs and crazy people. And now it's kind of become McKinsey'd out. And everybody has a lot less fun. And this was kind of an old school kickback that, the people I was working with were like super smart and super funny. And what's nice is to have, all decisions are kind of grouped, some pigs are a bit more equal than others. And, but it was a lot of consensus on the thing, but it wasn't like people felt the need to put their fingerprints on something. You would see something from the mail person, or you would see something from the poster, and you go, yeah, good. And it wasn't like Zoom people. I've got other projects that, and which I will remain nameless, but, you're on a fucking Zoom call with 15 people, 13 who shouldn't be on the Zoom. And everybody's trying to do their thing, and you kind of, it's endless and painful, and the end product isn't better.
Right. Well, it's so what you're saying is that political consulting is now entering the private equitization phase, where before long they're going to destroy the business and blame it on all you can eat shrimp, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and there have been a bunch of PE firms that have bought a consortium of consultancies. Jeff Rose, Axiom is that. There's a bunch of polling firms who have bought it. And if you're senior emeritus, that deal makes sense because it becomes a retirement cash out, and you don't have to do a whole lot for it. But there's going to be a lot of pressure. And there's going to be ethical pressure on that too. And again, I'm happy.
I didn't expect you to actually take my joke and tell me that has already happened.
Oh, it's already
that caught me off guard.
It's horrifying. And again, I get, you're in this business to make a buck. I mean, it's a business first and foremost.
Right.
But I mean, like, what good has ever come of PE firms buying fucking anything? I'm sure there's an example.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's an example, but and again, it's going to create downward pressure, because what you see, what's going to happen is that the firms that have been purchased are going to need to make that nut. They're going to need to make that cash flow. And so they're going to take campaigns that they shouldn't take and talk candidates into doing things that they shouldn't do. I mean, I've done a bunch of races where, like, for instance, the woman that Brad and I meet, Kelly, she took 2 surveys and realized it wasn't going to happen. And so, they did the right thing and they pulled out, endorsed the other guy, and that's it. And she can live to play another day. And again, she was a very aggressive candidate, and she ran a very tough race. She was very tough. But I've seen campaigns that are just trying to suck the campaign dry the last dollar. But I've had campaigns where you look at the survey and you go, not happening for you.
Right.
And then the question becomes, what do you want to do? Do you want to go out with, shooting 6 guns and get, riddled with bullets?
Let's Butch and Sundance this shit.
Right. Or is there something else you want to do with your life? And I've also had campaigns where, you've had the candidate way down, and then late you get an explosive piece of information that's legitimate about the opponent, almost always personal and scurrilous and, potentially damaging. But you say, do you want to be the person that does that? Because that's what you're going to be known for, and you're never getting forgiven. So, if you want to be on a board or, run the basket of cheer thing for the fucking Kiwanis Club, if you do this, you're done. And some guys will say, yeah, I want to do this. I want to try to blow it up. I want to try to win. And others were like, no, I'll fight another day. But again, it's
okay. All right.
It's interesting. So what is the PE choice going to be? What is the private equity choice? If you're looking that you've got to make that quarterly payment of revenue, and I think that is going to affect stuff downstream.
Yeah, they're going to be. So you're saying they're going to put. There could be a pressure applied to. Well, if you stay in a bit longer, we spend some more money. Something could come in the October surprise, the last inning, the 9th inning surprise, and we can still pull this out, right? So now you start, and once you're in for a penny, you're in for a pound. You go all the way in. You've put everything into it. Something comes out. You're more likely to go into the more vitriolic attack mode because you have so much invested in it. So you think it's a race to the bottom?
Absolutely. You see that race to the bottom. I mean, you kind of saw that in Congress this week with the catfight.
Great segue. Yeah, it's funny that you bring that up, by the way, because I wanted to ask you when I saw that. I truthfully don't think I've ever watched so many political things in my life as I have in the last 2 years. There's been interest, and I would watch things. I would listen to C-SPAN on the radio when I lived in the DC area. Can you recall a time, let's say post World War II, though? I'm sure in leading up to the Civil War, we had this shit, but where there were as many personal attacks on people, it does seem that, and I know this kind of gets to the heart of what Representative Jasmine Crockett said, which was, the ruling is, I guess you cannot comment on someone's something or rather, but the rules of decorum. Have you seen this before?
Not to this extent, no. And I think you've got a couple things driving it. I think it is the lower quality of elected officials. And again, you've always had nitwits be elected to Congress, but I think there are more nitwits than normal. I think that all of this shit is televised now and recorded, which wasn't.
Right.
And so, an errant jibe would probably go unnoticed and censored because there's no audience for it except the room. And basically you're acting like an asshole. And there were punishments for that. This stuff is rewarded. It's rewarded by clicks. It's rewarded by being on shows. It's rewarded by, X. It's rewarded by Truth Social. And isn't this a great thing? So here's a piece of history. So why there was an American tradition where they don't say, Representative so-and-so. They'll say the gentleman from North Carolina, the gentleman from South Carolina, whatever it happens to be. And that is a tradition that comes out of British Parliament. And I'm going to I think it was the Reformation, where basically they came into Parliament and they were saying, where's Smith, Jones, and Harris? Because they're traitors and we're going to jail them and behead them. And that is why it became custom not to refer to people by their names. Because
that's why you ever watch like Prime Minister's questions where it's like the right honorable gentleman or whatever?
And that is the tradition. So, so basically they couldn't come in and behead you and imprison you. And that's where that
interesting.
Comes from. And again, if anybody listening has never seen the Prime Minister's questions, they're worth looking up because they're
they're entertaining.
Yeah, and I think that is what was missing from the catfight. That at best, Prime Minister questions are a combination of both substance and style. And the style isn't mean girl lunchroom shit. It is, you are my intellectual and moral inferior, and which can be devastating. And I think that kind of stuff is fun, and I think it's appropriate because it means you have to raise your game. This was just kind of schoolyard stuff, and it was short, it was entertaining, and it was funny. But, do you think more highly of the people involved than you did before? And the answer is no.
Right. I don't know if this has ever happened. There was a rule that they ended up having to pass in Congress where you couldn't bring your sword in or something, right? Weren't they having duels in the House at some point? I do know that they've had duels outside, muskets or whatever, but I think they had to pass a rule that wasn't that kind of like the point of the cloakroom or something, was you had to leave your arms outside or something?
It was, but there's the famous case of the actually he was what I think they called a radical Republican, almost being beaten to death on the floor of Congress.
Right.
War. So I'm reading this book called The Lincoln Miracle, which is really it's short history. I think David Ahearns or Bill Ahearns wrote it, and it's basically about the machinations of the 1860 convention.
Right.
But in it is a little bit about that incident. And the guy that actually did the beating kind of became a folk hero. And kind of like this kind of mean girl thing, this kind of catfight just happened. He was rewarded and saluted and editorialized for and
Right.
So, so I guess, everything, there's nothing new under the sun, but it's not helpful. I mean, again, there's the old joke about never mud wrestle with a pig because you're going to get dirty and the pig loves it, right?
Yeah.
So
I mean, what I thought was interesting about, I went back and I watched it, but also when it happened, Twitter or X was blowing up, and I couldn't believe that John Fetterman waded into the waters of that stench.
Yeah.
But as I've been watching John Fetterman, I've been more and more amazed at his progression into this kind of provocateur.
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed that to me, he's becoming the Elon Musk of Congress. Like, if you follow his Twitter, like he's using Twitter far more, X far more. I think he's almost feeding off and feeding into the Gaza thing. I think he's using so much of it. I think it's brilliant from a PR strategy or from a marketing strategy. He's inserting himself into arguments. He's getting name recognition. But I've seen videos and stuff where he's interacting with people who to me are coming across as perfectly normal people with normal questions. There was a video of a woman asking him about a pipeline that was running through some area, her neighborhood. And in the video, granted, I haven't fact checked this, but in the video, she says, you previously demonstrated with us against this pipeline. Like, you were there with us, and why have you changed your position? And he's like recording with his phone and very just kind of an asshole to her. He gets on the elevator and he's like, and the door closes. And I just was like, wow, like, she isn't a member. First of all, no offense, but you look like a fucking moron wearing a sweatshirt in the Senate, my opinion. But to combine that visual with the fact that, like, she seems quite normal and asking a constituent question, and you're coming across as an asshole, seems like a horrible look for you. But I feel like he's developing into a provocateur. I could be wrong, but I'm curious if if you also see him wading into these culture war bullshit things.
Yeah, and again, I'm originally from Philadelphia, so I still have a lot of ties to Pennsylvania. And it's interesting to see his kind of arc is that, he was the Democratic Socialist Bernie bro kind of super liberal, and he was kind of treated by Republicans in both 16 and in 20. By the way, I predicted in 16 that or is it 18? Wherever he first ran, he lost. That he was going to be a significant player. You could just see it. 16, because he lost a primary for the Senate against Pat Toomey. I can't think of the name of the woman who won, but she was awful candidate, and she was like the colorless PAC, institutional money candidate, and she lost to Toomey. But you could just see him in the primary. Holy fuck! This is a guy who has got great instincts. He has great instincts. And to watch his kind of arc from this Democratic Socialist, this kind of provocateur, right of center kind of guy, even though he's voting Democratic, but if you look at his votes, he's still voting Democratic, 95% of the time. But his body language is definitely Republican, and it's definitely reactionary. And my Democratic Socialist friends are apoplectic about his change. And I think he needs to figure it out. But I mean, there is a line between being funny and cutting and being a dick. And I saw that video, and that was being a dick. I don't know what took place before that. If she was a total asshole,
exactly.
But it doesn't matter. But it's interesting is that he was one person. He goes into the hospital for depression, and he kind of came out another.
Yes, 100%. I think honestly, the funny thing is like, I have no problem with him being the next Manchin, and I don't have a problem with people breaking from their party and making votes that are best for their state and their conscience, whatever. For me, I pay attention to power dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
You're a U.S. fucking senator, and this person is your constituent. So we like to think that she has the power. She employed him. She voted for him. They work for us. But that's not true. You're a U.S. senator. You have so much power. So to belittle her when she's coming to you and seeming perfectly normal to me.
Yeah.
Granted, maybe she was like chanting death to Israel 5 seconds before that. I have no idea what would have sparked him to be that way. But I was noticing just the power dynamic and the belittling and the just everything that you could hate about a politician in that moment, for me, was wrapped up. The only difference was they were wearing a fucking hoodie sweatshirt. And I was like, my mind is going to explode on this guy. You know what I mean? Like, maybe Dr. Oz wouldn't have been so bad after all. Who knows? You know what I mean? Maybe that guy would have ended up far more normal. I have no idea.
But what was really interesting is that, Dr. Oz was Muslim.
Yeah.
You know?
Isn't he still? He's
but it was really interesting is that, you would have had a Republican Muslim in the U.S. Senate, and it would have been curious to see how he dealt with, Palestine, the Palestinian
right.
War. I mean,
right.
Yeah.
And this might be my own anti-Semitic bias. I have no idea. But is Fetterman Jewish? It sounds like a Jewish name. I have no idea.
No, he's German. It's like German Dutch.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Jewish names often are like German sounding, right? Okay. All right. Yes. Well, listen, I think, to your point, I think we've touched on it before. I have no doubt that everything that we've talked about, Marjorie Taylor Greene, AOC, Jasmine Crockett, and John Fetterman, have all raised significant amounts of money based on the events of that of that committee meeting,
Guaranteed.
which is the really like boiling. It's like you just have to take a step back and be like, why are we giving money to these people to continue to act like this? Because we want it. Maybe we want the housewives, the real housewives of the committee meeting. I have no idea.
Yeah, and I think that is kind of fun if shit's actually getting done. But
sure,
it ain't getting done. And they can't even decide what needs to be done. It's
totally.
And I think that's that. And
I will say. No, sorry. Go ahead.
No. I mean, I think that there's something. Part of it is what I call, not to pick on him, but that's kind of Jon Stewartism attitude that everything is kind of a snark or a cut or a that kind of thing, which it gets tiresome quickly.
I've never linked that before, but you're right. I think with the rise of the Daily Show, there was this rise of like gotcha snarkyism.
So
that's interesting.
Here's what I can tell you about electoral gotcha snarkyism. Not only does it not work, it backfires because voters, and you can like it if it's your guy, if it's your team, doing the snarky thing. But the absolute weakest attack argument in American politics is that you're a hypocrite. Because people instinctually know, of course I'm a fucking hypocrite. Everybody's a hypocrite. You're a hypocrite every day. Everybody's a hypocrite every day about everything.
Totally.
And people are kind of sensible about that. And, people are saying, well, you were against this. Now Republicans are like trade tariffs are a great example. Republicans losing their minds right now on trade tariffs when they were formed under Trump. And, if you're an average voter, you kind of go like, well, of course you're partisan. That's what you guys do. That's like it's really baked into 100%. Your job description. And so to say, you're a politician and you're kind of going like, well, what's the argument again? And again, totally. going back to, one of my, the pillars of persuasion, voters ask a very simple question. What's in it for me? And how that's defined, how you define that is kind of going to be what wins elections. But, and again, it is a reasonable question. If you work for me, what's in it for me?
Sure. Mm-hmm. Have you, okay, man, there's two different ways that could go. So to your point about, you know, does it really matter situation? And actually, maybe more to my point of people are rewarded for things that maybe they shouldn't be rewarded for.
Mm-hmm.
I think briefly, I want to bring up the fact, did you see where Trump at the NRA speech floated Ken Paxton, our AG here in Texas, as a potential AG under a Trump administration?
No, I didn't see that, but
The,
yeah, okay.
yeah. First of all, what I love about it, it seems very par for the course, and Ken Paxton has been certainly a loyal advocate for Trump. What people don't know, however, is that he's still under federal investigation for certain crimes that he may or may not have committed. That his own staff reported to him to the FBI, and then they were terminated from the office. Maybe for reporting him, maybe not. They say for. I'll let people use their own common sense. And he recently had a 9-year investigation against him for securities fraud that he was able to get to go away as long as he paid about $275,000 in restitution and 100 hours of community service. So what I love is that it used to be, I remember in high school, my civics teacher said there was a quote that someone said, if you want to be president, you must decide at 5 years old and live your life accordingly. I have no idea who said it. I don't know where that came from, but I just remember that quote very specifically. And basically, I think the idea about it was like, it requires a very specific, like, you can't have dirt on you. You have to, like, that's not fucking true. You know what I mean? Like, George W. Bush was a cokehead. Like, Bill Clinton was a draft dodging pothead. Like, none of that is true. And we've reached like peak. That's not true anymore. I believe we could end up with a felon as a president and a current federal investigation happening on our AG who will say, well, I don't think we need to pursue that investigation anymore. What does nothing matters?
Nothing matters, and I guess the counter argument is that, there was a different time where, John Kennedy also couldn't have been president. It's like,
sure,
a serious philanderer who's like whacked on amphetamines half the time. It's just like you kind of go like,
right.
The great Kennedy scandal is that he didn't rise to prominence. But his book won a Pulitzer. It's called Profiles in Courage, which we've often hear about. And, the book was ghostwritten by a guy named Theodore Sorensen, who was an aide, and Kennedy signed his name to it. And it was kind of an open secret. But old man Kennedy essentially bought him a Pulitzer. There was some kind of machinations. And so literally it's academic fraud. But people talked about it. By the way, so I want to do another shameless plug. One of my favorite clients, a guy named Michael Adams, who is Secretary of State for Kentucky, who was also the biggest vote getter in Kentucky last election.
Secretary of State, right?
Yeah, Secretary of State. And he's been great at, his mantra is that make it easier to vote and harder to cheat. And he's done that. In his initiatives, not only was able to get them through a Republican legislature, that was all about, vote for, stop the steal kind of, there was a stop the steal wing. But his initiatives also were supported by the Democratic governor and the state NAACP and most of the business concerns. And he's really extraordinary. Anyway, He won the annual Profiles in Courage Award. Which rarely goes to a Republican, and and he won it for expanding voting rights, which is kind of hysterical because when he was actually doing the policy, everybody from LeBron to who was the woman in Legally Blonde, the actress?
Reese Witherspoon.
Reese Witherspoon and a bunch of Hollywood celebs all denounced him as, Jim Crow and bullshit.
Right.
And, which all disappeared when, the NAACP said, this is a really good idea. And so anyway, he just won a national award for that. So I kind of had this unplanned but neat segue from, JFK or RFK.
I was about to commend you on how well you were able to drop that plug in there.
Yeah, right. And it's like, I should probably. It's a shame I'm not doing a new business pitch today because I feel like, synapses are all firing.
Let me ask you a question. We're talking about nothing matters.
Yeah.
Do you think it matters that Justice Alito has a upside down flag at his house in 2020 or 2021?
No. I mean, I don't know, but no. I think that the time for it to matter was in 2020. I'm curious why it came out now. Apparently,
Great question.
Apparently the whole story that he told to a reporter named Shannon Breen, who was an intern in one of my campaigns, by the way, years ago in Florida.
All right.
There was a huge run-in with a neighbor, and the C word was used to Mrs. Alito. And my wife kind of mentioned it to me that she had seen it someplace, and she said, the flag upside down, it's a sign. I said, well, it's the international distress sign. You fly it upside down. She goes, well, it's Stop the Steal. And actually I had to go back and look up Stop the Steal, a flag upside down. And apparently it was a thing. But there was somebody did a Google search on it. And apparently it's something that's become ubiquitous since then. It's like when people, I don't know, but a part of the upside down flag thing is like when there was a whole rash in 2018 of people doing the OK sign, and it's a sign of white supremacy. Remember that whole thing? And it's like, and then you kind of look at everybody does that all the time, right? And and again, it's his wife, it's not him. And my argument was, well, how did he decide then in all the 2020 vote cases? And most of those cases,
I didn't know about the upside down flag until the movie The Last Castle, and Robert Redford gets shot because James Gandolfini thinks that he's going to hang the flag upside down, and that's supposed to be huge disrespect to the flag.
Yeah, it's the international symbol of distress. Yeah, and I don't know why.
But if you're not in a moment of distress, it's also a symbol of like a disrespect to the flag. If you're not in a moment of distress, it's actually seen as a disrespect to the flag. Probably very similar to like an upside down cross. I think a Christian would think like, well, that's really fucking disrespectful, right?
Yeah.
So I think no matter what the reason, to use the flag either in your petty grievance with your neighbor or Stop the Steal or any of that other bullshit is very unbecoming a Chief Justice's family. And I don't buy his shit about his wife. I think that, could you be any more of a coward to blame it on your wife, even if it was true?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think it matters. Listen, if Clarence Thomas's wife actively participating in that shenanigans and being paid for by Harlan Crow here in Texas, like if that doesn't matter, I don't think a flag matters. Do you know? But I do think who was it that resigned for Ketanji Jackson Brown to take the court? What was his name? It wasn't Kennedy.
Breyer.
It was
Breyer.
Yes,
right.
Stephen Breyer. I've seen some interviews with him recently, and I agree with him. I think that you can rule from the bench all you want, but if you end up creating a society where people don't trust the laws, you've lost law and order. And I think we've entered a phase now where the Supreme Court has lost substantial credibility, and not because of the justices on the left side of the bench. I think it's because of the right side of the bench entirely.
There was a poll. There was a Harvard.
Mostly because of their personal lives,
Yeah.
not because of their rulings. You can rule certain ways. It's their personal lives.
Yeah, and I think that, I think if you have the honor of being a Supreme Court justice for life, you need to live a monkish,
Totally.
non-public life. I mean, you need to have. You shouldn't be giving speeches. You shouldn't be giving, unless it's for like the American Cancer Society or something like that.
Right.
But you should not be giving, political speeches. You should not have, and your family, your immediate family, should not do stupid shit, do stupid partisan shit. And again, I get, to the spouses are who they are, and telling your wife that you shouldn't do this. You sound like a kicker for the Kansas City Chiefs, but which was another silly thing. I mean, I was like, oh yeah, guy.
Yeah.
It's like, this is what we're going to be out about.
Okay. The last two things we should hit, because I think they're really important. There were two major episodes this week for the presidential candidates. One, Joe Biden seemed to say that he was the vice president during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And the other was Trump retweeted something, or resocialed, or whatever you call it on True Social, something with a unified Reich news clipping in the thing, right? Now, again, do I think either of those are going to end up really mattering and pushing the dial? No. I actually did go back and listen to like the Biden speech, though, and I kind of do lean towards I think it was more of a gaffe than he actually believed he was the vice president during the pandemic. But and I actually believe that the Trump story, that this wasn't a campaign created video. He was reposting something. And the article heading, you have to zoom in on it, right? But between the two, I love that each one plays into how we already perceive both of them. Yeah. It's not like they were reversed. It's literally that they play into our perceptions of both of them already. And at some point, you just have to take the evidence as it is and be like, maybe they are exactly what we perceive them as.
And I think that's a really good point, is that once you kind of set that narrative. By the way, I actually looked at both of those for this morning. I was thinking you might bring them up. So apparently Biden, and it's a very confusing thing, but apparently he was talking about H1N1, not... And the president was the president. I mean, it was this fucking convoluted thing. It was the president of some NGO. But it was so convoluted. But as you said, I heard it first. And I go, "Oh, he's senile as shit." And in the Trump thing, you kind of go, "Of course." Now, apparently, the reference was a Wikipedia piece about World War I. Not even World War II. Not even. And at the same time, doesn't matter, because you go, Trump tweeted about the Reich. Of course he did. Biden thought he was vice president. Of course he did. And
totally.
And that is set in. And, one of the things in politics is perception is reality. And one of my favorites is that, in 1984, Reagan running against Walter Mondale, Mondale was the son of a Methodist minister who went to church every Sunday. And, Reagan was divorced and a Hollywood actor who never went to church. But if you had to ask who was the more godlike, God-fearing kind of Christian thing, it was going to be Reagan overwhelmingly. And that was just the perception of it. And it's set. And so good campaigns work with that perception, right? I mean, And I think, again, there's been a lot of economic news this week and a lot of commentators saying, these peasants don't understand how good they have it under Biden. And it doesn't matter what the actual facts are. It's the perception of what the facts are.
Yes.
And so the Biden campaign has been pissing away hundreds of millions, literally, of advertising and effort trying to say, no, the economy is good. Not only do people see that's false, and they see it's false because of the credit card debt they're accruing and because of inflation. I mean, and that's it simply. I mean, that's it. It costs me more now. The economy can't be good if it's costing me more increasingly. It's that fucking simple. It's not like, well, if you look at this graph and this, fuck you. But not only does that not make sense to a voter, but it damages your credibility. If I told you three things, if I said to you, man, the snow's really coming down. I mean, I'm in Los Angeles. The snow's really coming down hard now. And by the way, I won the Powerball last night. And then I told you, I think Joe Biden is going to win Alabama by a 2-1 margin. Maybe I can make the case or the third one, but because I told you two obvious lies, the first two, you were never going to believe the third. And so so if Trump said, no, I'm not a Nazi, or no, I'm not a right, I'm not and the heart of it's, authoritarian, that no, I'm not authoritarian, people go get the fuck out of here. And to his political sophistication, he's never done that. He's never said, oh, I'm not that guy. On the other hand, Biden trying to convince people that the economy is good, all it means is that I can't trust anything else you say. And that is a really, really hard rule for politicians and staffs to follow. And the only way I learned how to follow that is to have my head beat in elections, losing them, by trying to say something that was factually true, but nobody believed.
Yeah.
And and even these things are open. I mean, both those things are kind of open to debate. You can, depending upon your partisanship. But if the voters you need to persuade don't believe it, why would you fucking tell them that?
Totally.
And again, it goes to the lack of sophistication, I think, that is at the heart of Biden's White House and reelect, because there's nobody, frankly, from my generation who has done a lot of campaigns that would ever lead off spots saying the economy's good, things are going. You would never do that. You would start it off with,
I was just going to say, what would have been interesting is if the unified right video had been done for Biden and was talking about all the wonderful things that are going to be done in the second term.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yes. 100% yes. It's so interesting to me that we keep saying it's perception, yet they keep reinforcing the goddamn perception.
because one of the problems I think with Biden, and I've seen it with older clients, is that they no longer have peers. And there's nobody to tell Biden no that he respects, who's an authority figure, who will say, no, you're wrong. One of the more extraordinary clients I had was Arlen Specter, and who was, older than I am, and certainly he had more experience than I had. But to his credit, he would listen to non-peers, which is extraordinarily rare. But Biden has no peers. They're fucking dead. Or they're.
And he's the president, which is.
And he's the president.
Who's your peer then?
Trump, I think, has a similar, problem. I mean, I don't know what, even though I don't think Trump's ever listened to anybody, I think he's his own agent. But to have, how many meetings have I been into and politicians saying, if we just get people to tell them the truth, they'll believe it. No, that's your truth. It's not their truth. and
Totally.
it's kind of sad, but the fact that they keep going down this road, says to me is indicative of a larger dysfunction within the re-elect campaign and the White House. That people don't believe it, so stop fucking telling them.
Totally.
Because again, it damages your credibility.
I feel like this is a general problem. I know we're going a bit over, but this is a general problem I feel like I see with Democrats in particular. I feel like Republicans talk to people as they are, and Democrats talk to people as they wish they were. And they're consistently missing like who the people are. It's like they're trying to convince you of how great and how smart Kamala is and how equal and everything and da-da-da-da. It's like you're not talking to the perception of people, and you're trying too hard to be right rather than listening to what other people think and crafting your message to their ears. Do you know what I mean?
So in 1996, Bill Clinton was running for re-elect, and against Bob Dole. And universally, Bill Clinton was thought to be a scumbag. Philanderer, liar, prevaricator, blah, blah,
Totally.
blah, blah. They also thought, voters also thought, he was doing a good job on crime and he was doing a good job on the economy. And it's very similar, by the way, the re-elect is very similar to Nixon's 1972. So everybody thought that Nixon was a crook and a liar and a prevaricator and a scumbag and nefarious. And they didn't say, boy, Nixon, you really like him. He's a good guy. Boy, Bill Clinton. No, they said, here are the stakes of the election. Here's what it's about. And this is what we're going to run on. And so Nixon's secretiveness and coldness played into the re-elect. Clinton being this kind of nefarious, maybe less than ethical thing, but he can work the system for you, is effective. There's a wonderful story. I believe it's Haldeman, who was one of the Watergate guys that wound up being indicted and was going to prison. But Nixon said to him, and I think the 1968 election, he said, Bob, he goes, people don't like me. And Haldeman said, well, Mr. President, you're not very likable. And Nixon went, true. And that kind of self-awareness is really rare in politics. That, and so they never ran a campaign that Nixon, you love him. Nixon, he loves puppies. They didn't do any of that bullshit.
Right.
Right. And I think that so I think the Biden campaign specifically is doing their candidate a disservice by trying to make him something he's not. And whoever did the debate video with "Make My Day" at the end of it, did you see that?
I didn't see that.
But Biden challenged Trump to a series of debates, and the fix was in already because he said, "I'm only going to do them on these 3 networks," and had worked with the networks ahead of time, and forget the ethics of the networks, leaving Trump out of debates, and I'm not going to, or debate negotiation, but putting that all aside, it's this kind of bizarre video with like 8 edits in 14 seconds, and he's like jumping around like he's a TikTok video, clearly because he can't read the prompter, but he ends with it. He goes, "Come on, Donald, make my day." Anybody that said that or brought it up in a meeting, I would have tried to push down an empty elevator shaft right after it was over.
For sure.
It's a phrase from a Clint Eastwood movie 50 years ago, half a century ago. So that's, that's like me making a Bing
People
Crosby.
already think you're old, man. Don't be quoting movies from like the first talkies.
Right. The second piece of it is more important, is that one of the reasons we voted for Biden and we the royal we and we liked Biden is because he was this grandfatherly, avuncular, kind, steady, I'm going to bring the temperature down. But it's just like, an 80-plus-year-old man trying to be the tough guy is kind of eye-rolling pathetic.
Totally.
I mean, you know, was somebody said Thunderdome in the old folks' home. But again, I mean, but
And
both
again, it goes against the perception, which is Biden, you're going to get your ass kicked by Trump. Like, Trump just speaks better than you, even when he doesn't speak better than you. He's better at faking being bad at speaking.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. But again, I think kind of this bully make my day. I'm the big tough guy, or I'm the young
Totally.
stud. I'm the 40-year-old senator, and I'll show you, motherfucker. I mean, it's kind of like,
yeah,
it's not who he is. B,
right.
It's not his strength. You know, his strength is talking to the elevator operator in the New York Times. A wonderful video. If you type in elevator operator New York Times, it's the best Joe Biden was, or Joe Biden talking to the kid with the stutter, or Joe Biden talking in South Carolina. That stuff is like, yeah, that's the guy I want as president. Especially that's the guy I want as president after Trump or compared to Trump or whatever the dynamic you want to say is.
100%.
You know, it's not this fucking old guy with orthopedic shoes talking about the good old days, you know, the good old days when I, you know,
totally
was a marathoner or whatever the fuck he's going to say he was. You know, I mean, it's, you know, and again, and the weirdness things too. I mean, you know, my favorite, every time you gotta go like, oh my God, Trump is like saying all these crazy things. And then Biden comes out about his uncle maybe being eaten by cannibals during World War II. And you kind of go like, what the fuck is the matter with you? Like who? I mean, that's, you know, that's like, you know, you're with your buddies at 3 a.m. after, you know, half a quart of fucking vodka and smoking weed. And somebody says, you know, man, my uncle might have been eaten by cannibals in World War II, you know? And
totally.
you kind of, right?
Totally.
That's what that conversation is. It's not a conversation that you expect the guy that's got his finger, you know, who's got the key code for nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's, I don't know. It's, I think it's going to come down to people holding their nose and pushing one button or the other, and it's going to break one way, and we'll see what the next 4 years has in store.
Yeah.
I know. Let's end it with this. That's in homage to Brad Knott. Why don't you set the line for the general election against Franklin Pierce's great grandson, Frank Pierce? I don't know. Do you feel comfortable? Do you feel comfortable making a prediction? What would the over-under line be on that race? North Carolina's 13.
Yeah, I think you want to take, I think the line for Pierce is 39.5.
Ooh, okay. I'm going to write that down. 39.5.
And I have no idea.
All right.
No polling, no nothing. I'm just kind of looking at the district and looking at the relative quality of candidates. And so I think it strikes me as a 60-40 district. And it also strikes me as a district that Brad Knott won't even have an opponent going forward because it's too Republican of a district, and he's too good a candidate. That's my guess.
You don't see anybody coming from his right flank to primary him?
No, maybe. I mean, that's always a possibility, but I think that is a greater possibility than having a Democrat take him out.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Chris, another one in the bucket. I'll talk to you next week.
All right, sounds good, man. Talk to you soon.
Bye, my friend.